All right. I don't need that. I have a very loud voice. I'm good for now, at least I do. All right. So good afternoon. We're all Turnpike School students, and many of you from our community. Thank you for coming out here today for our special guest, Marian Blumenthal is on. I'm so honored that she was able to visit us here today. Marian is a Holocaust survivor, and she is here today to share her story with all of us here. It's a wonderful privilege that we have. I think that today her story is probably more important than ever before, considering the rise we're seeing in anti-Semitism across our country and across this world. And her story and what she went through is essential for us to understand. So I want all of us to enjoy, listen, learn, and I'm going to pass it on to Tef, who without Tef, Marian wouldn't be here. They've been wonderful. Our relation with Tef over the years, always, partnering with organizations to have the opportunity to meet some Holocaust group. And this is the first we've had come to our school since I've been here 5 years. So we're so happy to have you here, Marian, and thank you, Tef. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Tewksbury Education Foundation, or TEF, as you all know, is happy to welcome Marian here today. Listen closely to her story. There's a period in our history in the late 30s, early 40s when people of the Jewish faith were captured and murdered. And the magnitude of that is about 6 million people. We're not just talking about a few. And there were survivors, fortunately, Marian among them. So I'm going to turn it over to her for her to tell you her story. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mitchell and Councilwoman Mrs. Frankel and Mrs. Simon for giving me the opportunity to speak to and with you, the students here at the old Turnpike School. This afternoon, I'm here with you to share my story. It is my childhood experiences during World War II in the concentration camps. I will tell you about our liberation and how we finally started our lives anew in our blessed United States of America. Mine is a story that Anne Frank might have told had she survived, and as most of you know, perhaps all of you know, Anne Frank was a young Jewish girl who died along with most of her family in a Nazi concentration camp during World War II. This is also a story that conveys a message of perseverance, determination, faith, and above all, hope. After the presentation, I will be pleased to answer some of your questions. Life in the early 1930s in Germany was very much for my family, as it is here for most of you today. Never did we think that the anti-Semitic incident there would ever lead to very much. My father was in a successful shoe business in a small town. My parents, 2-year older brother and I, lived comfortably with my grandparents above the shoe store. Life for Jews was made increasingly more difficult, and in 1935, the Nuremberg laws were formulated and enforced. The following are just some of the many restrictions imposed on the Jews in Germany. Jews were not allowed into theaters, into parks, or into swimming pools. All public schools were closed to Jewish children. Then there was an evening curfew for the Jews. Jews were only allowed to shop during specific hours of the day, and non-Jews were not allowed to shop in Jewish-owned stores. Non-Jews were just not allowed to associate with Jewish people. And then a big letter J for Jew was stamped on ID cards and on passports. These restrictions went on, and it was then that my parents decided to make arrangements to leave the country. My grandparents, who were in the late 70s and ill, refused to leave their home. They could not understand the urgency or the necessity of doing so. My grandparents passed away in 1938, just 11 days within each other, and soon thereafter, we received our necessary papers for our immigration to America. I was just 4 years old at that time. November 9th, 1938, Kristallnacht, or Crystal Night. It was the night of broken glass when the Nazis and their many followers smashed the windows and the storefronts of Jewish-owned stores. Jewish establishments, synagogues, and Jewish books were burned and destroyed. This was the beginning of a massive pogrom against the Jews in Germany, a massive verbal and physical assault against all German Jews. In reality, this was the beginning of the Holocaust. On November 12th, following Kristallnacht, the German government actually fined the Jewish population for the damage caused that night. These imposed taxes were used to rearm Germany. The night of Kristallnacht, our apartment was ransacked. All valuables were thrown into a pillowcase and taken away. But worst of all was that they forcibly transported my father to concentration camp Buchenwald in Germany. All sorts of terrible stories were related to my mother, and we did not know if we would ever see my father again. He was released after 3 weeks only because our papers were in order for our immigration to America. And to think that just a few years prior, he had been awarded the Iron Cross for his military service in the German army of World War I. We were forced to sell both our home and our business for a fraction of its worth. And soon thereafter, in January of 1939, we left for Holland, from where we were to sail to the United States. And for almost 9 months, while awaiting our quota number from the American State Department, my parents were assigned to take care of some 125 children. These young children had been sent by their parents from various parts of Europe to escape from the Nazis. In December of that year, 1939, we were deported to the detention camp of Westerbork in Holland to await our departure date to America. Westerbork was constructed by the Dutch to accommodate Jews from various parts of Europe. In May of 1940, just 1 month before our planned departure date, the Germans invaded Holland and we were trapped. All of our belongings, which were about to be loaded on board ship, were burned and destroyed as the harbor of Rotterdam was bombed. Under Dutch control, Camp Westerbork were tolerable. My mother, father, brother, and I shared 2 small rooms. We all ate in a communal dining room, and at that time there was enough food for us so that we did not go hungry. Adults were assigned to various work duties. My father worked to repair shoes, my mother worked in the kitchen. We children had a makeshift education and lived a very dull, stagnant life. Several months later, when the Nazi SS took over the command of Westerbork, we became acquainted with the ever-present, terrifying 12-foot high barbed wire. And as thousands of Jews were rounded up, many taken from their hiding places, as was Anne Frank and her family, Camp Westerbork became overcrowded. And it was at that time that we had to share our small quarters with another family. And then the dreadful transports to the concentration and extermination camps in Eastern Europe began. This started in early 1942. And from then on, every Monday night, lists of those to be deported were posted, causing incredible anxiety, anguish, and fear. And then on Tuesday mornings, men, women, and little ones were marched to a nearby railroad platform from where they were transported. This area became known as Boulevard de Misère. It was an area of complete misery. At 11 o'clock on Tuesday mornings, the trains left for their destination. And of the total 120,000 men, women, and children that departed Westerbork, 102,000 were doomed never to return. In January of 1944, it was our turn to be shipped out. We children were actually glad for a change of environment. We were very naive, and we welcomed the move. We were allowed to take one knapsack each, and whatever we could stuff into it, we were permitted to take. When we approached the railroad platform and we saw the cattle cars in which we were to travel, our fears began to mount. Adults suspected, and they somehow knew what was in store for us. I remember that it was a bitter cold, pitch black, rainy night when we arrived at our destination, concentration camp Bergen-Belsen in Germany. We were pulled and dragged out of the cattle cars and greeted by the German guards who were shouting at us and threatening us with their weapons and with the most vicious attack dogs by their sides. I was a very frightened 9-year-old, and to this day, I still feel a certain sense of fear whenever I see a German shepherd. Bergen-Belsen were divided into various areas. It was sectioned off and surrounded by electrified barbed wire. Guards were always in strategically placed high guard towers, and in the evenings, as soon as it would turn dark, the bright searchlights from above would constantly sweep the camp grounds. We were placed in a section that was known as the Sternlager, or the Star Camp, named so because we had to continue wearing that yellow star which had been issued to us back in Holland. Men were on one side of the camp and the women on the other, and this did make it possible at times for families to get a glimpse of one another. We were placed in this particular section of the camp with the hope of being exchanged for German nationals in Palestine, who the British put under house arrest because they were citizens of an enemy country. Unfortunately, that hope never materialized for our family. 600 of us, 600 of our people were crammed into each of the crude, wooden, heatless barracks, meant for 100 when originally built. There were triple-decker bunk beds with 2 people sharing each bunk. German winters were bitter cold and very long. We were given only one thin blanket per bunk and a straw-filled mattress. And this bunk was our only living quarters, and that for 2 people. I was very lucky that I was able to share a bunk with my mother, and that my brother was able to share a bunk with our father. But can you imagine Two adults, two strangers sharing a bunk under such horrendous conditions. A bunk that was no larger than the small cupboard that we're all so familiar with. I remember the first time seeing a wagon filled with what I thought was firewood for the one small oven that we had in our barrack. That oven, of course, was never used. I soon realized that what was in the wagon were dead, naked bodies thrown one on top of the other. Toilets and so-called washing facilities were at a great distance in the most primitive outhouses. Toilets were long wooden benches with holes cut into them, one next to the other. There was no privacy, there was no toilet paper, there was no soap, and hardly ever any water with which to wash. And in the almost year and a half that we were in Bergen-Belsen, never once were we able to brush our teeth. There were no trees, no flowers, nor did we ever see a blade of grass. And whenever it rained, we had to slosh through the mud, adding even more misery to our already dismal existence. Every single morning, without fail, we were ordered to line up on a huge field. It was called an Appellplatz, 5 in a row as we were counted. We would have to stand there until each and every one of us was accounted for, often from early morning till late at night, without food, without water, no matter what the weather, without protective clothing. Frostbite was common. We would treat our affected toes and fingers with the warmth of our own urine. Our diet consisted of a slice of bread a day, some hot watery soup with grizzly meats and turnips and potato peels. Bread was later cut back and given to us just once a week, and only if our so-called quarters were neat and in order. Our birthday present to one another was that little piece of bread that we had saved up from the previous week. Once a month, we were marched to an area to shower, and there, under the watchful eyes of the guards, we were ordered to undress. We had heard about exterminations and gas chambers in other areas of Europe, and we therefore were never sure when the faucets were turned on as to what would come out, water or gas. The Nazis did their utmost to break us physically, spiritually, and emotionally. Unfortunately, they did succeed with many of our people. It was not uncommon for people who were no longer responsible for their actions to attempt escape, even though they knew that the chance to succeed was next to impossible. But they also felt that they had nothing more to lose. The failure of their attempts were obvious when we saw their lifeless bodies hanging electrocuted against the barbed wire. Malnutrition, dysentery, and the loss of the will to go on is what destroyed body and mind. Death was an everyday occurrence. The dark, crowded quarters often caused us to trip and fall over the dead. Bodies could not be taken away fast enough. We as children saw things that no one, no matter what the age, should ever have to see. I know, of course, that you've all heard, you've read, perhaps you've studied, adults might have seen movies, perhaps even true documentaries about the Holocaust. But the constant foul odor, the filth, continuous horror and fear surrounded by death is indescribable. There is no way that this can be put accurately into words or pictures. Our bodies, hair, and clothes were infested with lice. We learned that there's a distinct difference between head lice and clothes lice. Squashing them between my thumbnails became my primary pastime. Much of my time was taken up with make-believe games, and one game, a game based on superstition, became very important to me. I decided that if I were to find 4 pebbles of about the same size and shape, that would mean that the 4 members of my family would all survive. My mother, my father, my brother, and I. It was a torturous, painful, very difficult game to play. What if I couldn't find the third or fourth pebble? Might that mean that one or two of my family members would not pull through? Nevertheless, this game gave me something to hold on to, some distant hope. After a number of months on our meager diets, our stomach shrunk so that the hunger was no longer painful. Teenagers and men suffered most from malnutrition and were the first to die. Those who lasted the longest were the women, and mothers in particular. It was their strong will to keep their children alive that kept them going. And my mother was one of those remarkable ladies. There is no doubt in my mind that it was my mother's inner strength and fortitude that finally saw us through. One day, my mother was able to smuggle some salt and potatoes from the kitchen where she worked, and somehow managed to cook some soup in secret. This was done on our bunk. I was on the bunk with her, trying to hide and shield what she was doing. Soup was simmering just about finished when the German guards entered our barrack for surprise inspection. In our rush to hide that setup, the boiling soup spilled on my leg. We had been taught self-discipline and self-control the hard way, for I knew for sure, had I cried out, it would have cost us our lives. This happened in the spring of 1945. I was just 10 years old. The population in Camp Bergen-Belsen were dying off rapidly, but not nearly fast enough to satisfy the Nazis. Several weeks later, it was decided to send 3 trainloads of our people to Eastern Europe, towards the extermination camps and the gas chambers. My family was among the 2,500 on the last of these 3 trains. It was April of 1945. Russian army was closing in from the northeast, and the British and the Americans from the west. Under normal conditions, this train ride from Bergen-Belsen to whatever area of Eastern Europe they were going to send us would have taken no more than 10 hours. But because the Germans tried to evade the Allies, we were en route for 2 long weeks without food, without water, without medical supplies, without sanitary facilities. That meant no toilets. Whenever the train came to a stop, those who were able, those who were strong enough, were permitted to get out and take a drink from a nearby stream or dig up roots to eat. My mother remembered taking some sort of a pot and collecting water from the locomotive, and who knows what else that pot was used for. The need for water at that time was almost more important than food because of the severe dehydration due to the dysentery and the high fever due to the typhus. Let me briefly explain typhus. It is a highly contagious, deadly disease that's caused from filth and spread by lice. At the same time, while the train was at a standstill, the newly dead were taken off and buried along the tracks. In addition, our train was subject to frequent air attacks by the Allies. It is truly remarkable how any one of us was able to survive under such horrendous conditions. In fact, 500 of our people, that's 1 out of every 5, died en route or shortly thereafter. My burned leg was severely infected, and it was impossible to keep the wound clean or lice-free. In late April, after 14 days of this surreal and horrifying journey, German guards stormed frantically through the train, seeking civilian clothing so that they would not be recognized by the Allies. And we knew then that the war was coming to an end. It was the Russian army that liberated our train and led us to a nearby farm village in eastern Germany. Most of the inhabitants had fled, and we took over the homes. Kitchens were stocked with ample food. It was rich and good, actually much too good for our starved bodies. We could not tolerate that unfamiliar nourishment. And at that time, at the age of 10 and a half, I weighed 16 kilos, or as we know it here, 35 pounds. And my mother weighed a mere 70 pounds. The Russians, in a crude way, tried to help us the best that they could. I was brought to a nearby clinic for medical attention. My leg was in very bad condition, and I was close to losing it. Fortunately, it was decided to treat the wound, and I was very lucky that my leg responded to medication and it gradually healed. As I regained my strength, I also relearned to walk. And in the interim, our heads were shaved because that was the only way that we could rid ourselves of head lice. Although we were all weak, ill, and thoroughly exhausted, I vividly remember the spring of 1945. Weather was beautiful, sunny and bright. Trees and grass were lush and green. Flowers were in bloom. Birds were singing. It was a wonderful, exciting feeling to be free at long last. We were all ill with typhus, but my father had to die from it 6 weeks after our liberation, and this after 6.5 years of mental torment and physical abuse. My 12-year-old brother Albert actually helped bury our father. When I talk about those years, it is as though I'm relating a nightmare, a very bad dream. I separate myself from it ever having happened to me, and that is how I deal with it. It is a wonderful story of how we gradually recuperated and were sent back to Holland to start our lives anew. My brother and I were eventually placed in a children's home in preparation to live in what was then British mandated Palestine, and we know today as Israel. Most of the children in this home survived alone, without their parents. I felt like a total misfit. I needed to learn how to resettle into a normal society. Had no training for that. Here I was by this time 11 years old. I had never been in a store. I had no idea what money was all about. Had almost no table manners. It was like learning to live all over again. It was in this home that we became reacquainted with life in its normal state. Meals served us were delicious and nourishing. You can imagine that just about anything and everything tasted good to us. I began my first formal education at that time at the age of 11 and a half. We were taught the secular subjects, reading, writing, arithmetic, in a Montessori school where we progressed at our own pace. The Dutch language in which we were taught was all new to us. We also received a thorough education in Hebrew and in religious studies. The British, who were governing Palestine in the 1940s, had issued what was known as the White Paper, restricting the number of Jews permitted into the land. And they were intercepting many of the refugee ships and interning the survivors on the island of Cyprus, and in some cases, turning the ships back to Europe. In November of 1947, the United Nations voted to partition Palestine between Arabs and Jews, which in May of 1948 led to the establishment of the State of Israel. In 1947, just 1 year prior to Israel becoming a state, our illegal voyage from Holland to Palestine was planned. Danger once again loomed over us. And because parents at that time were not permitted to accompany their children, my mother managed to make arrangements for a family of 3 to emigrate to the United States. And thanks to the Holland America line, we were able to use the tickets which had been purchased 10 years earlier. We arrived in Hoboken, New Jersey, April 23rd, 1948, by coincidence, exactly 3 years to the day of our liberation. It was a Jewish relief organization that found a home for us in Peoria, Illinois. I had never heard of Illinois, definitely not Peoria. And there, at the age of 13, I once again started life anew in a strange land and again learning a new language, my third new language in less than 3 years, for Dutch, then Hebrew, and now English. And because of my inability to speak English, I at the age of 13, was placed in the 4th grade with 9-year-olds. Although both my brother and I worked long hours after school to help our mom pay bills, I nevertheless found time, actually made time to take extra courses during the year, attend summer school, and by working very hard in my studies, I was able to be graduated from Peoria Central High School 5 years later at age 18, ranking 8th in a class of 267 students. It was 2 months after high school graduation that I was married to Nathaniel Lazan, who I had met at the age of 16 in Peoria. And God willing, we'll be celebrating our 71st wedding anniversary this coming August. Nathaniel, where are you? Just raise your hand, that's all. He's amazing, and I think you might be interested to know that he was a United States Air Force pilot, and of course, it's very disappointing. I am grateful. He deserves every bit of that applause, by the way. I am grateful. I am very grateful that I survived healthy in body, mind, and spirit, and that together with my husband, I'm able to perpetuate my heritage with a wonderful family. We're 3 grown children, all 3 are happily married, and have given us 9 beautiful grandchildren and 13 magnificent great-grandchildren. Amazing, amazing. And in March of 1996, my memoir, Four Perfect Pebbles, co-authored by Lila Pearl, was published by Green Willow Division of HarperCollins. It is now in its 34th printing in hardback. Then Harper decided to do a 20th anniversary edition. This is it. I don't like the cover, and I know it. It's a barbed wire that really bothers me, but Harper was in charge, and I guess this is it. Scholastic Book Club has made it available since 1999. It's been translated into German, into Dutch, and Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, published it in Hebrew. This is my image when I was 7. They did a super job. And if you like, you may all read it in Japanese. Now, I happen to know that Dr. Mitchell speaks and writes a magnificent, how can anyone write this? Okay, like amazing, amazing. It's in Japanese, so if you like, take some lessons, okay? Okay, so you see that despite the terrible things that happened to me as a child, my life today is full and rewarding. Although I've spoken to upward of 2 million students and adults over these past 25 years or so, it still has not become easy. However, I do realize the importance of sharing that period of our history with you, simply because in a few short years, we will not be here any longer to give a first-hand account. Your generation is the very last generation that will hear these stories firsthand. And I therefore ask you to please share my story or any of the Holocaust stories that you read and hear about. Share them with your friends, share them with your relatives, and someday share them with your children. And yes, even with your grandchildren. When we're not here any longer, it is you who will have to bear witness. As difficult as it is, the horror of the Holocaust must be taught, must be studied, and kept alive. Only then can we guard it from ever happening again. This is the very yellow star that I was forced to wear. It says Jude, which in German means Jew. It was just another way to denigrate us, to isolate us, and to set us apart from the rest of society. This represents a Star of David, a beautiful, meaningful Jewish symbol. But the Nazis made it so very ugly. Each of us, each and every one of us must do everything in our power to prevent such hatred, such destruction, and such terror from reoccurring. And we can begin by having love, respect, and compassion towards one another, regardless of the religious belief, regardless of the color of our skin, regardless of the national origin. This respect towards one another must begin in our homes, around the kitchen table, dining room table, wherever we gather as a family. We, the adults, must pass it on our places of business. You, the students, in your classrooms, in the halls of your school, communities, towns, cities, and only if there's respect and compassion towards one another in the countries can we expect to have peace in the world. We must begin with you, the students. We must begin with our children. Let us treat people as individuals. Let us look for similarities and respect the differences. Let us build bridges and reach out towards one another. And we must be true to ourselves and not blindly follow a leader without thinking ahead and searching our hearts and our minds as to what the consequences might be. It is not cool to follow just anyone's lead without first checking to see what his or her true intentions are. Please, please remember these messages. Share them with your friends who are unable to be with us this afternoon. Share them, remember them, but above all, let us all live by them. We're all aware, or we should be, that 6 million Jewish people were murdered during the Holocaust. 6 million. Your beautiful state of New Jersey has a population of a little over 9 million. Can you possibly imagine 2 out of every 3 people here in New Jersey wiped out? The 6 million also represent 1/3 of the entire pre-World War II Jewish population. Among them were 1.5 million children, children just like you. We also need to remember that there were 5 million non-Jews who lost their lives. Among them were the righteous Gentiles, as we refer to them, very special people, non-Jews who jeopardized their lives to save Jewish families. They would hide them in the attics. They would hide them in the basements. Farmers would hide them out in the barns. They were hidden in convents. And when these good people were caught doing what they thought was the right thing to do, they also were deported to concentration camps and in many cases lost their lives. And that brings me to another message. We must never generalize and judge an entire group by the actions of some within that group. These are all universal messages, messages that each and every one of us is familiar with to varying degrees, but need to be reminded of over and over again. And this certainly was a good opportunity to do so. These messages are the lessons learned from that dark period of our history, and certainly apply to today's world situation, and definitely to our own individual lives. By listening, I hope that you prevent our past from becoming your future. And I now need to share something with you about an extraordinary lady, my mother. This was my mother on her 104th birthday. Amazing, remarkable, magnificent, beautiful lady. Mom passed away 6 weeks short of her 105th birthday. There were 2 things, let's put Mom right here for some of you to admire. Perfect, okay. There were 2 things that my mother demanded of my brother and me when we came to America. Number 1, learn English. Learn it quickly. Number 2, work as hard in school and at work in order to succeed. My mother was 40 years old when we came to America, knew absolutely no English, learned to read, write, and speak a magnificent English. She was an extraordinary, extraordinary lady. And when she was still with us, we were 5 generations of women, strong women. I refer to that as survival and continuity, and it certainly was that. She was a fabulous mother-in-law to Nathaniel, and he was a wonderful son-in-law to my mom, for sure. My brother Albert passed away a few years ago, dealt with this altogether differently than I did not talk about it as freely as you heard it from me this afternoon, was happily married, lived in California, but by choice did not bring children into this world. Had a very difficult time with organized religion. All of that made me very sad. But I didn't fault Albert. We have to remember, he was 2 years older than I am, was with my father in the men's section, and I am convinced that he saw and experienced things that I did not. God puts us on this earth, gives us a beautiful mind. It is this mind that allows us to choose right from wrong, good from evil. Therefore, men did this towards one another. But did he have to make it so bitterly cold when we were standing out there on a pell all day? I have a direct line. I ask loads of questions. Don't get too many answers, but that's okay. Faith I will always have. After all, here I am. 3 children, 9 grandchildren, 13 great-grandchildren, from whom generations will be forthcoming. He made sure that enough of us survived so that we will always be here. I am proud of my faith, as I'm certain you're proud of your faith and of your heritage. But please, please, let us all remember to respect the right of others to their belief. Be kind and good and respectful towards one another. That is the basis for peace. Had there been respect and compassion towards one another some 75, 80 years ago, I would not be here with you this afternoon to share that dark period of our history. 9/11 would not have occurred. Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, the Ukraine, the Middle East, all these countries that are in such turmoil would be peaceful countries for its people. Be kind and good and respectful towards one another. Please. There's very little that we can do against the negativity in our world, but how we treat, behave, and reach out towards one another, that is entirely up to us. Did I ever find my 4 pebbles? It's a frequently asked question. I always found my 4 pebbles. I made it my business to find them. When I would find them, I would put them in a safe place, so the next time when I would search for them, when I couldn't find the 3rd or that 4th one, well, I knew exactly where to go and pick them up. Maybe that was cheating, but it was my game, and guess who made the rules? You need to know that I was only about 9 or 10 years old when things were at its worst. We had nothing to occupy our time with constructively. No paper, no pencils, no books, certainly no games. So I was lucky at such an imaginative mind, and my imaginative games were always based on a positive attitude. I would search for a piece of glass or a piece of a mirror, whatever I could find on the dirt ground in Bergen-Belsen. And when the sun would shine, that little piece of glass would cast a reflection onto the ground. And that little bitty reflection, it became my pet. As long as the sun would shine, I would have my pet, and my pet would never ever die. I would also imagine that one day I once again would have my 3 Bs. And these 3 Bs represent our everyday comforts that we're all so familiar with and take for granted. The first B represented a bed. I knew that someday I once again would have my very own bed. The second B would represent a bath. Warm water, soap, clean towel, with that would come toothpaste and toothbrush, of course. And what do you think was the 3rd B? It starts with a B. It's something we eat every day. Anyone? Come on. Bread. I knew that someday I once again would have enough bread so that I would never again go hungry. These imaginary games, if you will, they were my survival techniques. They were my survival skills. Do you know that we all have survival techniques and skills within us? When the need arises, we just have to search for them, find them, and be sure that we put them to work. No one is spared adversity. No one is spared hardship. We all have to overcome obstacles at one time or another. But with perseverance, with determination, with faith, and above all hope, one can overcome just about anything and everything. Above all, never ever give up hope. It's not so much what happened to a person, it's how we deal with it that makes the difference. I came to America and I got acquainted with potato chips, and I got some for lunch today. Thank you for those potato chips. And whoever was eating was dipping in something white and creamy. I didn't know from dips, so I thought it was mayonnaise. Well, I couldn't wait to get my own big bag of potato chips and my own jar of mayonnaise. And I did that do a job on me. I very quickly became a big 13-year-old, and there I was with a little 9-year-old. You know, there could have been plenty fun of me. I looked differently, certainly acted differently than they did. But I need you to know that they were so good to me, helped me with my homework, included me in their games. I hope that when a new student comes into your class, your school, or community, that you too help him or her to adjust to a new situation. Put yourself in his or her place, how you might feel if you're placed in a strange and new environment. And you, the students here at the Old Turnpike School, you are so fortunate to be receiving a good education in a beautiful environment with dedicated teachers and principal, and the support of the, what are you, TEF or something? Yes, okay. Please do not take your educational opportunities for granted. Make the most of it. Give your studies an extra measure of hard work. You will never, ever regret it. Nathaniel's from New York. How much time do you like this rushing? I have 10 minutes at least, right? Anyway, don't worry about the buses. I'll wait for you. Okay. Nathaniel's from New York. He went to Bradley University in Peoria. Lucky me. He went home on vacations, and way back then in the 1950s, long-distance telephone calls were very expensive. There was no such technology that we have today, no computers, no texting, none of that. But with a telephone calls, I said that telephone calls were very costly. But there was a 3-cent stamp. And with this 3-cent stamp, we would write to one another every single day. There really was such a thing as 3-cent stamp. And major problems, though, in his letters to me, he would add 5. I knew there were more than 5 words, but he insisted on 5. 5 words that he asked me to define and put into a sentence. That's a lot of nerve with all I had to do, but I knew he would help me with my English, and I guess it did work. So Nathaniel over there, thank you. Again. Okay. Like I would write my letters in rough draft with a dictionary by my side, and only when I was satisfied with the way the letter was written would I dare mail it to him. Talking about a dictionary, my father always carried a little chunky German English dictionary with him, and he would study the vocabulary in secret whenever possible, always with the hope that someday he would reach America. When we came to the United States back in 1948 and approached New York Harbor, we were told the night before that if we wanted to see the Statue of Liberty, we needed to be on deck bright and early the next morning. Well, you can be sure that each and every one of us was on deck to greet and be greeted by that magnificent symbol of freedom, the freedom that had been denied us for so many years. And when that tall figure of that longed-for symbol appeared, I became too choked up to talk. So many emotions seized me at once, joy and gratitude and bitterness for the cruelties we and so many others had suffered, and deep, deep sadness that my father would never know that we had reached America at last. And whenever we crossed the Verrazano Bridge, you guys know the Verrazano Bridge, when we reach a certain point on the bridge, I will always crane my neck to see the Statue of Liberty. It's a most magnificent, beautiful, meaningful sight. I have 5 minutes. That clock is... Okay, that's it. That's all I have. 5 minutes. Okay, you guys. I have a song to share with you with it, but I won't sing, not just yet. I just want to, before I share that song with you, I want to thank Dr. Mitchell and everyone who was involved, and you, the students, you were a wonderful, wonderful audience. I wish each and every one of you a healthy, happy, productive future in a world of love and peace. And I thank you so much. Okay. I want to share a song with you. I won't sing. It's a title song of a musical, Four Perfect Pebbles, written by John Holt from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and sung by the 11-year-old girl by the name of Lyric. Okay, Nate, it's your turn to push that button.
Four perfect pebbles in my hand, some made of granite, some of sand, found in this dark and desolate land. Four perfect pebbles in my hand. Mother comforts Albert and me, Father shields us from misery. No parent's love can ever erase this sad and forgotten lonely place. Four perfect pebbles do I see, one for each member of my family. I hold them tight, I will not cry. All will live, no one will die. If I should lose my precious stones, my secret hiding place will reveal more perfect pebbles stored beneath these barracks made of wood and steel. Four perfect pebbles do I see, Mother, Father, Albert, and me. I count them over one by one. I fall fast asleep. My work is
You really were wonderful, attentive audience, and I wish you a successful remaining school year, and yes, a healthy, happy, productive future in a world of love and peace. I thank you.
And thank you, everyone. You guys were great, great today. Let's hear one more time for Marianne. She was amazing. My fifth grade teachers, if you can dismiss your fifth graders back through that door first, please. You can give these kids like hugs. These kids